Larry, you saw Joni out there, lots of emotions. Some people with the Rainbow Push Coalition talking about the fact that this was an unfair decision. As an attorney and someone who has watched this trial very closely, do you feel like, obviously, there should not be emotions when it comes to a final verdict? Do you feel like, in this case, watching everything, that the jury came to the right decision?
Well, let me borrow a line from one of my old law school professors many years ago who told us that the jury never gets it wrong. I don't have that much confidence in juries, but I think this case came down to two very different views of the defendant and which one you believe. On the one hand, the prosecution was suggesting, and a lot of people believe, that this guy should be punished, that Rittenhouse should be punished in some form for living in Antioch, getting a rifle, going across state lines, or he got it after he crossed state lines, going to Wisconsin. 17-year-old should have been home, shouldn't have been involved that night. And once he got there, was in the middle of a crowd carrying an AR-15, and there should be, and whatever happened after that, certainly he contributed to, and certainly there should be some punishment for that. That's part of the prosecution's theory here. The defense, however, was saying you can't look at that whole big picture. You can consider the fact that he's 17, but they said, let's look at the three separate instances where shots were fired and base your decision only on those seconds and whether or not he was defending himself in that situation, and ignore the fact that he was from Antioch, ignore the fact that he crossed state lines, ignore the fact that he possibly should not have been in possession of a rifle, and that as a 17-year-old, he should have been home in bed that night and not out there on the streets anyway. But it appears that the jury went along with the defense theory here, that you have to look at what happened in those 4 or 5 brief seconds of each incident and look at the chaos that was on the streets that he was in the middle of. And the jury believed that he had a right to defend himself, even using deadly force to do so.
Let's talk about what difference did the video make? Because at one point, the jury asked to see video again, and a lot was made near the end by the defense that they had new and fresh video that they didn't have access to before. And they wanted to declare a mistrial to be able to use that. Well, it turns out that's not going to be necessary, and that wasn't the case. But how much of a difference did that video make in all of this?
Well, as much as the video may have helped the prosecution in suggesting that possibly Rittenhouse was not personally threatened on the scene that night, and there was no evidence that, for example, Rosenbaum had shouted at him and said, if I catch you, I'm going to kill you. As much as it helped the prosecution, it may have helped the defense in showing all of the chaos that was going out on the street, going on that when Rittenhouse was on the street at that time. And there were probably several jurors, if not most of them, who thought in the middle of all that chaos, you have a young man who made a terrible decision, showed poor judgment, should not have been there, should not have had the rifle, but they didn't blame him for opening fire in the middle of all that chaos. I have always believed that when the video is crystal clear, it certainly makes it is the most important factor in the case. But where you had all this video and none of it may have been crystal clear, then you look at the second most important factor, and that's when the defendant takes the stand. And in this case, he took a chance. He took the witness stand. Most observers felt Rittenhouse held up very well under questioning, under cross-examination. He broke down and cried. Some people thought it was an act. Apparently, the jury did not. And when the video is not that clear and just shows a lot of chaos, it might have been his testimony that turned the tide in his favor. It was a risk, but apparently it paid off.
Right after the verdict came down, the judge did go out of his way to let the jurors know you do not have to talk to anybody if you don't want to, but if you want to talk to anyone, including the media, that is your option, that is a right that you have to make that discussion. So now, after we all wait to see if and when the jury will in fact be willing to come up to us and tell us why they came to their decision. I'm curious, though, in high-profile cases like this, an MSNBC crew faced some serious charges after following the jury after they were let out yesterday after deliberations. What's happening with the jury right now as we speak, as far as you know from your experience?
Well, typically the judge will go in and have a few words with the jury and thank them for their work and see if they had any questions. And he'll poll them and say, are there any of you who feel comfortable talking to the media? If you do, we can set up a room here in the courthouse and get it taken care of right now. And he might advise them that if you take care of it now and you hold a little press conference and you answer a half hour's worth of questions, then you will not likely have the media hounding you in the days and weeks ahead. And as a former member of the media, I know hounding might be a strong word, but there certainly will be pressure if none of them talk today. If they all say we don't want to talk, there will be pressure from the media showing up at people's homes, knocking on their doors, sending them flowers, trying to get them on the Today Show, trying to get them on Fox Thing in the morning. There will be pressure placed on these jurors to talk if they don't do so today. So when they think about that, some of them say, you know what, let's do it today and get it over with.
Yeah.
As to the case of the MSNBC individual, the freelancer hired by MSNBC, who was apparently following the jury bus the other night, that sort of thing happens in these high-profile trials. If NBC wanted to follow the bus, they should have hired a helicopter, the way that stations followed R. Kelly around Chicago, used his black bus using a helicopter. But those things happen in cases like these. There's pressures placed on reporters to go get interviews with these people. I'm sure this individual was just trying to get some locations or license plates where he could reach out to the jurors after the trial, but he crossed the line and got too close to them.
Been watching live video as you're talking, Larry, one of the family members of the people involved in the Rittenhouse shooting being escorted out by police, or at least escorted to another area where she may likely speak. But I'm curious, what do you think, if in fact there was one, what might have been the turning point during this trial? Was it his testimony? Because a lot of people were surprised that he testified.
I always think when a defendant takes the stand in a trial, whether it was Rod Blagojevich, whether it was Jason Van Dyke, I always think that's the turning point, and whether or not the jury believes them. If they walk away from their appearance on the witness stand with some credibility, and the juries believe them, then I always think that's the turning point in the case, and I think it was here also.
Okay,
and plus the grooming job that had been done, the fact that he didn't appear the way he did that night with the AR-15 hanging around his neck. He appeared very dignified, quiet, self-assured, kind of angelic with his puffy cheeks.
Yeah.
And I think that's was very influential for the jury.
I want to go back to the, I had to interrupt you earlier when we had to go back live out there. I want to go back to the issue regarding the gun and crossing state lines. You were starting to talk about why that didn't become an issue in this.
As I listened to the court that day, my understanding was that a juvenile in possession of a gun in Wisconsin, somebody under the age of 18 in possession of a rifle, it turns on whether or not it's considered a dangerous weapon, and not all rifles, including an AR-15, are considered dangerous weapons. It depends upon the length of the barrel. And if the barrel has been shortened or something's been converted into a sawed-off shotgun, then it's considered a dangerous weapon. And the prosecution in this case presented no evidence to suggest that this was anything more than a standard AR-15. And in Wisconsin, those are used for hunting. Juveniles possess them, and they're not considered dangerous weapons.
And let's talk about that, too, because you have to wonder if this case is going to set any precedent when it comes to gun ownership, when it comes to vigilantism, as a result, because the nation has been watching, and in some cases, many parts of the world has been watching. Do you think that this is going to have an impact on future cases or future laws that lawmakers are now going to try to pass? Because the bottom line is 2 men were fatally shot and 1 was wounded.
Well, I think it's too early to tell. It'll take a while for this verdict to set in. Sometimes when verdicts come down, people think that they're world-changing events, and then later on you look back 5 years later and very little has changed. I think of the Sandy Point shootings, when after the Sandy Point, when the children were massacred in a school, everybody thought at that point gun control nationwide would become standard practice, and there would be tougher gun control laws around the country. And yet years later, a lot of the laws have not changed at all. So I think it's too soon to tell. I think there will be an increased focus on vigilantes, but the jury has found apparently that Rittenhouse should not be placed in that category, that he was someone who was acting in self-defense. And the self-defense theories go back a lot further than some of these more recent laws. And it's been pretty clear for years that you can use deadly force to protect yourself if you believe your life is threatened. And in that case, that's what in this case, that's what the jury believed.
Larry, we have just been told the city of Chicago has released a statement saying that police have been given a heads up and they are aware of this verdict. You know what that means, Larry. What do you suppose is happening now in the city of Chicago after this?
Again, we'll find out within the next few hours. I would imagine there will be protests organized, if not tonight, within the next few days. I remember after the Laquan McDonald video tape was released, Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, became a huge day on the Magnificent Mile with thousands of people turning out to protest. Maybe there will be some organized protests like that in the days ahead. There will be a stepped up police presence. You know, I also go back to the Jason Van Dyke trial. And after the Laquan McDonald video was released, and while there were massive protests after the video was released, there was not a continuing, after the verdict and Van Dyke was found guilty of second-degree murder, there was not continued, there were not huge protests at that point. You can hear my dog barking.
I was just going to say.
Sylvia, I apologize. She always gets excited when there's a verdict.
She wants your attention. That's all there is to it. You know,
give me 30 seconds to take care of her, and I'll be right back.
You got 30 seconds. Okay. You got 30 seconds.
Okay.
We'll come back to you in just a bit, Larry. Okay, let's head back out.